Griffith Stadium was the home of the Washington Senators from 1911 to 1961. It was located in Washington, D.C., and is one of the strangest ballparks of all time. The reason for this was the street grid of the neighborhood the ballpark was in, which created odd angles. At first, it was 400 feet down the left field line from home plate, which is insanely far. It was later moved to 388 feet, which isn't a whole lot better. The fence angled in going towards center, and left center field was 360 feet from home. Then in center field the walls went in, which is probably the strangest part of the ballpark. As you can see, it was a high fence that went in and at an angle that had to be a nightmare for outfielders. This was because of a large tree as well as several houses that were there on the other side of the wall. The owners of the properties were not willing to sell when the ballpark was being built. Right field had a high wall and no seats, which is because it went right up against the street. After the Senators moved to Minnesota and became the Twins after 1960, a new Senators team played there for one season in '61. Then they moved out after getting a new ballpark, and Griffith Stadium was demolished in 1965. The Boston Braves played at Braves Field from 1915 to 1952. When this park first opened, the dimensions were crazy. It was 400 feet down the lines and about 500 feet to center field. This was done intentionally so that there would be more inside the park home runs hit. I can't imagine that many home runs were hit over the fence in those times, and in fact, it took a whole 7 years before a player did hit one over the fence there. The park also had a very large amount of foul ground as well. But this was the dead ball era in the early years of the park, so that wasn't a huge surprise. Soon they built closer fences, and many changes were made to the park over the course of the next few seasons. In the end, it looked much more normal, but still pretty unique, especially with all the foul territory. When the Braves moved out in 1952, the stadium was reconfigured into Nickerson Field, which is the home of Boston University soccer. The Los Angeles Coliseum opened in 1923 and has had countless sporting events over the years. Its main use has been the home of USC football, who have played there since it opened. Along the way, it has also had Olympics, NFL teams, soccer, and even NASCAR. But the strangest configuration might be for baseball. When the Dodgers moved from Brooklyn to Los Angeles in 1958, they first played in the LA Coliseum. It had plenty of seats, but the stadium was not built for baseball. Left field was way too close, and right field was way too far away. To solve this problem, they set up a giant net in left field to stop so many home runs from being hit. They also put up a temporary fence in right field to make it more reasonable, but overall it looked really wacky. Looking at this, I can't even believe they played there at all, but somehow they made it work. The Dodgers played there from 1958 to 1961 and then moved into Dodger Stadium. In 2008, they played some preseason games there against the Red Sox. Tiger Stadium is one of the most interesting sports stadiums I've ever seen. It opened in 1912 and was obviously the home of the Detroit Tigers. There were a few interesting quirks there. One was the upper decks and how they were right on top of the lower seats. And particularly in right field, they hung over and went past the lower seats and over the field of play in fair territory. This caused some fly ball home runs that would have otherwise stayed in the yard over the years. And in center field, there was a flagpole that was on the field of play. If you hit the flagpole in the air above a certain point, it would be ruled a home run. The stadium was a very old-fashioned park, and over the years it became more and more unusual. After the 1999 season, the Tigers moved out and into their new home of Comerica Park. There they actually had a flagpole on the field as well for a while as a tribute to the old park. However, they ended up moving things around and it's now behind the fence. Old Tiger Stadium sat vacant for a few years until they began to demolish it in 2006. Today there's a turf baseball field on the site and it's used for various levels of athletics. When Toronto first got a Major League Baseball team with the Blue Jays in 1977, they needed a place to play. It was decided that their home field would be Exhibition Stadium. This was the home of the Toronto Argonauts, a Canadian football team. The stadium opened in 1959 and was built for just football. Multi-purpose stadiums were very popular in the 70s, and many MLB and NFL teams shared. It was usually baseball fields that would be turned into football and not the other way around, because baseball takes up more space. However, in Canadian football, the fields are much larger than in American football. Canadian football fields are 110 yards long and 65 yards wide. The end zones are also 20 yards long. American football fields are 100 yards long, 53 yards wide, with 10-yard end zones. So when the Blue Jays moved in, it looked really strange. Some changes were made to accommodate them, but it still seemed pretty weird, and some of the outfield seats were so far away. I hope they didn't cost much. Then in right field there were no seats at all, just a temporary fence. And being in Canada having an outdoor field, sometimes it snowed on game days. Overall, this stadium was very strange, and the Blue Jays played there until 1989. Then they moved into the Sky Dome. The Argonauts also moved into the Sky Dome as well, and Exhibition Stadium was demolished in 1999. Next we have Crossley Field. This was the home of the Cincinnati Reds from 1912 to 1970. It opened in 1912, and this ballpark was strange for several reasons. First off, it was pretty small, having a capacity between 20 and 30,000 for most of the time. In some parts around home plate mainly, there were large amounts of foul ground. The outfield kind of looked weird how there were no seats in left, and in center field there was a wall that went right up against the road behind it. Then a really large section of seats in right field. You can tell that the stadium had to fit in the area between the roads. But also, it causes right field to be extremely far, and center field to be rather short. Left field was pretty average at 328 feet. Center field was just 387 feet from home plate though, and right field was 366 feet. But the strangest thing about the ballpark was definitely the terrace. This was an incline or a hill in the back part of the outfield. It was a 15-degree incline that could be frustrating for outfielders. This is also what inspired Tal's Hill, which was in Houston for some time. After playing in this stadium, the Reds moved out after 1970, and Crossley Field ended up getting demolished in 1972. Up next is Fenway Park. This is the current home of the Boston Red Sox, and it opened back in 1912. Fenway Park is very strange for many reasons. It's on a very small plot of land compared to most of the other ballparks. This makes most of the seats pretty close to the action. In left field they have the Green Monster, which is a very high wall in left because it's just 310 feet down the line from home plate. This is because of a road right behind the wall there. The rest of the outfield has very strange dimensions as well. In right field it curves, and it's just 302 feet to the pesky pole. Some of the seats in right field are also not facing home plate. There are many unique things about the ballpark, such as obstructed views and things like that because it's so old. It's been expanded and renovated a number of times, but it's still probably the weirdest ballpark in MLB today. Olympic Stadium opened in Montreal in 1976 and was first used for the 76 Summer Olympic Games. It was built to be a multi-purpose stadium, with Major League Baseball being one of the purposes. The following year after it opened in 1977, the Expos moved in. Now, the design was a very rounded design, similar to many of the cookie-cutter stadiums of that day and age. However, there were many very unique features to this stadium. The ballpark had a retractable roof, or at least it was supposed to. It took them years to finish it after the Expos were already playing there. The roof was opened and closed from a 541-foot-tall inclined structure, which is the most recognizable feature of this park. The roof from the outside looks kind of weird, but it possibly looked even weirder on the inside. Also inside, there's an Olympic swimming pool with seats located under the tower. This is not visible from the baseball field area though. When the Expos played there, the turf as well as the walls were very thin and players did not like it. As the years went on, the stadium became less and less suitable for Major League Baseball. The Expos moved to Washington, D.C. and became the Nationals after the 2004 season. Since then, Olympic Stadium has mainly hosted soccer, and it still does. From 2014 to 2019, the Toronto Blue Jays would play some spring training games in Olympic Stadium as well. Up next is the Baker Bowl. This was the home of the Philadelphia Phillies from 1887 to 1938. As you can see, it's on a rectangular plot of land that looks more fitting for football, but nevertheless, they played baseball there. The original dimensions in 1887 were wild. Left field was 425 feet from home plate, center field was just 330 feet, and right field was just 280 feet. Yes, you heard that right. An insanely short right and center field, and then very long left. There was also a bicycle track that circled the field. In 1894, there was a fire damaging the stadium, and in 1895, there was a reconstruction and expansion. These dimensions were still very strange. It was 341 feet to left field, and still just 280 feet to right field. There was a high wall there to prevent so many home runs from being hit though. Then, in right center field, the scoreboard stuck out, and in center, between the stands and the wall, it created an odd space. The highest capacity the park ever reached was just 20,000. For most of the time though, it was around 18,000, which is very low for Major League Baseball. After the 1938 season, the Phillies moved out, and in 1950, the Baker Bowl was demolished. Finally, we have the Polo Grounds. This is possibly the strangest ballpark in Major League Baseball history. It is famous for its unique shape and field dimensions and was located in New York City. Back in the 1800s, the site was originally used for the sport polo. It was not a stadium but just grounds, which is how it got its name, the Polo Grounds, which wasn't even an official name at first. However, in the late 1800s, Major League Baseball started being played there on the site, and it became more popular. Because of this, they added some grandstands for fans to watch. Eventually, a baseball stadium was built there. The New York Giants were the main team to play there, although several others played there over the years. The Giants ended up moving and having several versions of the ballpark. Somehow, the name the Polo Grounds was always kept. The final version of the park is the most memorable to most people and also the most unique. The right and left field lines were extremely short, and then it very quickly got deeper and deeper, and center field felt like it was a mile away. The actual dimensions were 279 feet down the left field line and 258 feet down the right field line. Right and left center were about 450 feet away. Then in dead center, the field went out to 483 feet from home plate. The bullpens were located in fair territory in the outfield because they were so far away. Then in that area in dead center, the players would walk up the stairs and go to the locker rooms there. A large amount of fallow ground was around home plate, and the stands had the old style of having an upper deck right on top of the lower level. Overall, I personally think this is the weirdest MLB stadium of all time. That's all for today's video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.